This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Welcome, everybody, to another bonus episode of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal. With me, my good friend and brother, Liam. Liam, we are just 1 week removed, at least at the original time of recording here, from wrapping up our final review of Batman Caped Crusader Season 1, or at least covering the final episode of that season. And that means we're fresh out of Batman Caped Crusader stuff to talk about. But wait, how fortuitous is it? It's almost as if we planned it this way, that at least at the original time of recording this episode, we are just 6 days away or so from the Season 2 premiere, which means we have plenty of stuff to catch up on, everything that's happened in the last 2 years since Season 1 dropped to now Season 2's anticipatory drop in just a few days here. A lot of stuff to catch up on, so we're going to do a little preview of Season 2 here of Batman Caped Crusader.
Absolutely excited to talk about it. We've having, as you said, just finished our full reviews of all 10 episodes of Season 1. Y'all can head back in the archives and listen to them. That we've done over the last couple of years, and I do feel the excitement building all of a sudden. If you had asked me a month ago if I was excited, I would have been like, I guess, but I feel like re-immersing ourselves in the world in the lead up to Season 2 has kind of rejuvenated my excitement, and certainly, as we'll talk about some of the more recent quotes we've had from the people working on the show as well that we will get into, has also kind of galvanized and excited me as we look towards Season 2 dropping in just a few days at time of original recording.
There we go. We will get into that here in just a second. And of course, because this is a bonus episode, we don't have a IMDb synopsis for this week's episode or even for Season 2 as of yet. However, we will still remind the good folks at home that typically our IMDb synopsis for our episode is brought to you by the good folks at buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. Hey, that's us. That's right. We bring our own synopsis here. We sponsor ourselves here. And actually, in a way, you can sponsor the IMDb synopsis by joining us at buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. If you want to, you can become a one-time supporter of the podcast. Send us a little note with your little encouragement there and a little bit of coin for Java if you would wish to support the podcast that way. You can also check into our monthly support options. We offer 3 different levels to support us at a monthly clip. It also gets you perks if you do so on a monthly basis. You can check out all of those perks, including our top tier, which is our Super Friend tier, which comes with the most and exclusive perk of them all. That being the opportunity to submit a question about whatever we're talking about that week. Typically, it's about the episode that we're reviewing, but we actually have a question this week, Liam, specifically around Batman Caped Crusader from one of our supporters. So we'll check in with that a little bit later. Either way, if you want to become a one-time supporter of the podcast or become a monthly supporter, head over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review, and please consider supporting the podcast today. Liam, as we get in here, so before we get into what's coming from Season 2, all of the things that we kind of didn't cover in the lead up to Season 2, very famously, or maybe if you've not joined us or you're new to listening to the podcast since 2 years ago, thank you for joining us. And thank you for checking out this preview episode. But we were very excited about Season 1 of Caped Crusader, all of everything leading up to it, all of the hype, all of the accolades that were being bestowed upon it. Famously, the people involved with it being Bruce Timm and James Tucker, like 2 of the great minds that were involved with shaping the DCAU. Oh yeah, this guy named Matt Reeves is also involved as an executive producer, hot off of his incredible run with his movie, The Batman. And then, the ever controversial J.J. Abrams also credited as an executive producer, also attached to it. So a lot of big names, a lot of big ideas here, a lot of quotes, a lot of things were thrown out there, including maybe the most infamous and at times a double-edged sword for the series quote, with Bruce Timm saying that this series would be more Batman the Animated Series than Batman the Animated Series. So we had a lot of excitement leading up to that, and every little nugget that we could grasp onto, we were reporting on, and we drop a bonus episode. We needlessly, baselessly speculate on things that we saw or heard or interviews that were talked about. We did not do that this time. So there's a little bit to catch up on, not a lot to catch up on, because it was pretty radio silent for almost a year and a half, I dare say. We were in contact with some of the artists that were involved with this show, asking them to come on and potentially talk about season one. They were kind enough to let us know that while they would love to come on the show, they were still under NDAs, and because they were still involved with season two, they couldn't necessarily come on the program and talk about anything. So we knew, and generally speaking, when a show like this of this caliber gets canceled, you would hear about it. We knew season two was coming. But there wasn't a whole lot that was revealed until recently. So we'll get into that in just a second. But let's catch up our listeners, just in case you have forgotten. Maybe you're tuning into this review to potentially get hyped for season two. Let's kind of talk about briefly where we left things, and we recently covered that actually in our last two episodes, so maybe you want to just tune into those. But in case you need a refresh, let's talk about where we left things with season one.
Yes, previously on Batman Caped Crusader, one might say here. But yeah, so as we discussed in our reviews recently, the whole kind of season arc when it comes to Batman and Bruce Wayne himself over the course of season one is how closed off he is emotionally, how stoic he is, even in how he treats Alfred, his sort of one real ally at the start of the season. He's very dismissive and, arguably verbally abusive to Alfred, who he doesn't even call by his first name for most of the season. And so the whole season kind of leads up to Batman making these sort of uneasy alliances with, be it Barbara Gordon, who is not Batgirl, at least not yet in this show, but is sort of a crusading defense attorney who is trying to give some of the people in the less fortunate in Gotham City a fair shake in the legal system, despite not getting a lot of help from the cops or the district attorney, one Harvey Dent. And so we see him building his alliances with her across the season, as well as with her father, Police Commissioner James Gordon, who is dealing with a much more blatantly corrupt Gotham City Police Department than maybe we are used to seeing in the original Batman the Animated Series, where maybe you could slightly allude to a cop taking bribes or being on the take for the mob, but you couldn't come out and say it. The two lead detectives for the series, Arnold Flass and Harvey Bullock, are just straight up working for Boss Thorne, Rupert Thorne, who's sort of the head of the mob in this time in Gotham City, and they are just running the town, and they basically work almost in the open as his enforcers, even as they are still cops as well. And so that all comes to a head with Batman and having a confrontation as Batman, Barbara, and Commissioner Gordon try their best to save the now disfigured Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face, from Flass and Bullock long enough so that he could testify against them and against Boss Thorne. However, in the melee, Harvey is shot dead, and while Batman does ultimately allow Flass and Bullock to be arrested by Gordon and Renee Montoya, his other, maybe the only other good cop in that, at least in that particular precinct in Gotham City, Batman sort of lives to fight another day. One of the last images we see, in fact, the last image we see of Batman, is him hurling a batarang through the window of Boss Thorne's high rise and staring him down, as we see that Rupert Thorne realizes that he will now be watched like a hawk or like a bat, I guess, by Batman going forward as we see the fear in Rupert Thorne's eyes as he knows that the new Dark Knight will be looking down on him along with his allies in the police department. And we do see right at the end of the season that Batman is at least starting to perhaps repair his relationship with Alfred as well. And then, oh yeah, we get a little just before the credits roll, we get one final little teaser for what's to come in the next season, season 2, that we're about to preview here. We see a man who with white skin who is injecting something into his victims that's causing tremendous disfigurement of their faces along with uncontrollable laughter. That's right, we get a little tease of the Joker yet to come, this version seemingly much darker and vicious than perhaps the more jovial clown Prince of Crime we're used to in many other mediums. So that's kind of where we leave ourselves at the end of season 1. We're hopefully heading towards a kinder, gentler Batman, even as a more vicious and evil threat than anything he's faced before is looming on the horizon.
Yeah, that's right. We'll touch a little bit maybe on that kinder, gentler Batman as we go through here. We will talk a little bit about the trailer that dropped just a few weeks ago, at least at the original time of recording here. The preview of what we got to see, what we can kind of read into about season 2's Batman, and then maybe if there's time at the end, we'll do some baseless speculation. We call it the speculation station. We're gonna talk a little bit about maybe some things. We'll use it along the way here as we talk about the some of the comments that are made by some of our showrunners, of course, and then as we break down what we see in the trailer from the footage there, as well as some of the stills that were released to IGN for the preview of season 2. But let's dive into, Liam, some of the behind the scenes stuff, since we didn't report on that during when it was happening. But as I said, one of the reasons we didn't really report on it is because there wasn't reports on this very much. It was a lot of working in radio silence, it felt like, when it came to what was happening with the show. We did get an article towards the end of October of 2025 that name checked James Tucker and involved. It was from the direct.com. It was an interview, it was only like 2 or 3 questions, I think, that they had spoken to Mr. Tucker about. Mm-hmm. But essentially, they led with the idea that Matt Reeves' Batman was not really affecting how things were happening or going on the Batman Caped Crusader show. They talked about how they're both potentially introducing a Joker to their universe. We'll talk about some of the quotes from that in just a minute here, but really we didn't hear anything about it until within the last month. We just kind of there was a animation convention that was happening, and we knew that Warner Brothers had a spot there. Warner Brothers at the time of recording here, by the way, still very much in under uncertainty about what their future is going to be, potentially merging with Paramount. We'll see how well that ages if we ever listen to this episode, 50 years from now, whatever now is. But that is the plan from what we know at this time, but there's still a lot of question marks regarding that. But we knew that they were going to be previewing the highly anticipated Batman Nightfall movie. And we got something here from Caped Crusader too, and it was a trailer. So in the meantime, we didn't hear or see much more about that until we got this interview this past within the last week or so from Animation Magazine. There was an article by Tom McLean in the issue number 360, which I believe is the July issue for Animation Magazine. You can check it out on their website. But there were some interesting tidbits, I think, that came through here. The first of which we'll talk about here, and I'm going to be careful with how this was phrased, because this is my speculation here. I think this was phrased carefully on purpose. My personal opinion here, not the article saying this. Mm-hmm. My personal opinion. I believe I'm reading the tea leaves here, kind of reading through the lines here. Bruce Timm was announced as quote unquote stepping back, or stepping back a little bit from his duties for this season. So that leaves sort of a vacancy there. except that James Tucker, who was also involved with it last year, co-producer, last season was also involved. So it seems like from this article that he has taken the main role at this point. Bruce Timm was said to still be attached to it, but is working on other projects at this time, or his attention is elsewhere, at this time. What that means going forward, I don't know. I think there were a couple of other tidbits in the article that may lead to speculation as to why that was the case here. Maybe it's because he is been doing Batman animation now for 35 to 40 years and wants to do something else. Maybe he's going to do some stuff with Comic Cons. I don't know. Maybe he's got some other secret project that he's working on with DC. Who knows? But James Tucker is kind of the head man for this season. And in this interview with Animation Magazine, I mean, we kind of already knew this from, I think, knowing Mr. Tucker's work in the DCAU, as well as his stuff from Batman Brave and the Bold. But he talked a lot about how he was greatly influenced, and a lot of his love for that era of Batman comes from Jerry Robinson and Dick Sprang, who obviously, Liam, I think, highly influenced, or you can definitely see the Dick Sprang influence in that Silver Age Batman Brave and the Bold comic, or homage from the cartoon. A lot of the characters there being a little bit lighter, a little bit more lighthearted. Some of their visual styles also kind of lending to that Dick Sprang era. But not only did he mention those two guys, but he also mentioned Chester Gold, who was Dick Tracy artist. So obviously we have a lot of guys who at the time the comic book style is not as colorful, not as bright, and is a little bit more grounded in that era's reality of mobsters, dudes in trench coats and fedoras, Tommy guns, and mob activity, and Batman being involved in stopping that aspect of it, rather than the more fanciful, colorful costumes that you ended up seeing come a little bit later.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting to hear. It not maybe having recently, we were just lucky enough to be joined by Eric Radomski, one of the original co-creators of the Batman the Animated Series, and he talked about his love of that sort of the Zoot Suit era, the gangster era, and how things like The Godfather really inspired him more than any comic book did. So it was interesting to hear Mr. Tucker, or read Mr. Tucker's thoughts on that, and the idea of like a Dick Tracy, that very like kind of prototypical 1940s, the fedora, the long trench coats, and that kind of thing, and how that's that, and really wanting to focus in more on the film noir aspects. And I thought there's interesting, maybe on a technical level, that he mentions about wanting to do more with shadow work in this season and silhouette, and how maybe that's actually something you do in post-production as opposed to drawing the shadows in. He said it can be very difficult, and so it may be more of something they do with like the color grading and maybe some of the after effects. Obviously digital animation has changed quite a bit over the years. I'm sure it's much different than what it was when they were making that original animated series, or even when even at the origins of digital animation, during Batman Beyond, or whenever this crew kind of started working with it. So I'll be interested to see what that means and how that reflects, because it does seem like the leaning into that as that German expressionist Art Deco style of the buildings, as well as, they said, just really layering in that shadow and really focusing on that, like I said, the guys, the Tommy guns and the Zoot suits and the coats and the double-breasted suits and all of that is kind of something that appeals to James Tucker, which is also interesting, like you said, to your point, because he's so adept and has such an eye for adapting the very bright and colorful, as he said, as you said, the Dick Sprang style, the giant typewriters, and the silliness and the brightest and most colorful things, the things that kind of led up to the Adam West show, where Batman and Robin are always being captured in some giant device, and the wacky death traps and all that. So it's interesting to see that he, in this case, at least for this show, certainly is gravitating towards not only Mr. Sprang's influence, but also, as you said, Jerry Robinson, who did some of the very early work with the Batman comics in the 1940s. So, yeah, I mean, that's exciting to me. I feel like that's a recurring thing we said when we talked about maybe some of the show in our views visual shortcomings in season one was that we wanted more shadow, we wanted more silhouette, we wanted more of the the detective kind of skulking around in the dark. So certainly that's something that as soon as I read that in the article today, I was like, oh yeah, this is. So it was kind of funny to see that and be like, okay, so James Tucker, at least in this case, in this instance, I think we were kind of in lockstep with Mr. Tucker and how he viewed season one of not necessarily trashing season one in any way, but to just say that like, oh, here's something I think we could do more of that would make the show better going forward. So yeah, I mean, Mr. Tucker certainly proved himself to be adept at running the shows, so to speak, as he helmed Brave and the Bold and the Legion of Superheroes cartoon, as well as several of the DC animated movies over the 2010s. So yeah, interesting. I guess yeah, if Bruce Timm kind of slides into a similar role that perhaps Mr. Reeves and Mr. Abrams have, where they're more kind of big picture, but they're not really in the minutia of the show anymore. That is interesting, and it'll be interesting to see if we can feel that tangibly, either in a sense of the plots going forward or in some of the visual identity. So yeah, that's a big deal. And of course, Cal, that is not the only sort of quote unquote shake up as far as the crew putting the show together, as there's another big change from season one to season two.
Yeah, extra, extra. Read all about it. So something else we found out in the animation magazine interview was that we are changing head writers, which is a huge shakeup. I think even more so than maybe Mr. Tucker kind of taking the lead role as far as the producer is here. So, very famously, Ed Brubaker was the head writer for season one of Batman Caped Crusader. He departed that role to take over. I believe there's a development of his own creation, the Criminal TV series that's coming to Amazon. So he's involved with that, which opened up this opportunity. So taking the reins as head writer is Mr. Jeffrey Thorne for season two. And I was not familiar with Mr. Thorne by name, but you might be familiar with some of the work that he's done. So he's done acting prior to what his career is now. He was an actor, but really over the last decade and a half or so, he's written a lot of comic books. He's done stuff for Dark Horse. He's written a bunch of Star Trek comics to his name. He's got a bunch of accolades for Marvel, mostly Black Panther. He did some X-Force and Spider-Man comics also. He has written for DC Comics also. He's written some Green Lantern stuff, John Stewart specifically. He did some stuff for Infinite Frontier, which I think was one of those large crossover events a couple of years ago also. And he's also done work for Milestone. That's his like comic book accolades, but he's also written for TV. So it's all in the DCAU DNA here. So he did work for Ben 10, which of course, Dwayne McDuffie, the late great Dwayne McDuffie was responsible for. So he did some writing there. He also did live action television writing for Law and Order, a couple of the CBS procedurals, I think Hawaii Five-0 and Magnum PI. He also did work on Marvel cartoons for Ultimate Spider-Man, and I think he wrote the entire fifth season for Avengers Assemble, both of those for the Disney Marvel cartoons. One of the things that this interview boasted when they talked about interviewing him, he talked about how he's got a collection of over 50,000 comic books, which is insane to think about how that's quite impressive. So he was saying that not to defend, I don't think his role as a writer, but just to say that he's a big fan of comics. He's not just some guy that writes for Law and Order or these cartoons, and they're just plucking him from those to write for Batman. And he's very clearly has a passion and enjoyment for comics as a whole here. So I do think that he's more than qualified. It's interesting listening to what his some of the things that he talked about in that animation magazine article were specifically about being comfortable with and encouraging the writers to not edit themselves when they were writing, to kind of come with their full ideas and allow him and maybe getting feedback from the Amazon and WB, who we learned from this article are more involved with season two.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the things that he talked about was being comfortable with that pushback from the studio and maybe whatever the involvement is from Amazon and WB this season, and kind of being willing to push for things when he's passionate about it, and also being able to receive some of that feedback and make adjustments when needed. So that sounds like somebody who's up for the job. Again, we'll leave that to how we enjoy the actual season two when the stories are released here. But yeah, that's a big change, and I think honestly maybe not the worst thing. With a shift in the direction of things, you kind of set a new path here. Batman himself is kind of on a new path here. We're introducing a character in the Joker in season two that is going to be maybe dynamically a little bit different, pun intended, than the season one characters we encountered. So it at the same time, Mr. Thorne seemed to be very comfortable with that noir aesthetic and the vision that the show has for it. So it'll be interesting to see what he brings to the table. His accolades obviously are very impressive, and the fact that he's written for both television and comics, I think, more than qualifies him for a role like this.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly seems to have the bona fides, so to speak, as far as his history writing for animation, superhero animation, as well as comics, as to your point. And yeah, I thought that was an interesting point. He talked about and that was sort of a note made in that same article, is that season one, when it got shopped, it was originally, as folks may remember, supposed to debut on HBO Max, and then it got kind of shelved and shopped around and ended up on Prime. But my understanding is that most of that first season was kind of already done by
Mm-hmm.
the time it got to Prime. So it sounds like, yes, that both Amazon and WB, as the partners, maybe are taking a larger role in the creative side of the season two. And I appreciated him being, the way he sort of talked about his role as kind of the shepherd and then the go between, so to speak, of being not only being a sounding board and sort of an editor of sorts for the writing team, but also, as he said, to kind of know when to pick your battles with the network. And he can kind of be the judge of whether or not is this a note we should listen to, is this a note I need to push back on, and and that kind of thing, which I'm sure is a reason why a guy like this has worked in television for as long as he has,
Right.
is knowing when and when not to push back on network heads and things like that. So yeah, I think it's interesting. It's Mr. Brubaker's such a prolific comic book writer, and obviously he's working on as I said, a new show based on one of his independent comics, which is very exciting. But yeah, I didn't necessarily get the feeling. I didn't get it like a distinct, like, oh, this is definitely an Ed Brubaker episode. And I understand in a writer's room, it's not really one person writing the script for that episode. It's a team of writers that kind of break the story together,
Mm-hmm.
and then one person's going to go off and kind of make the script and make changes and everything. So but yeah, I didn't necessarily feel like, oh, losing Ed Brubaker is going to like drastically transform the tone of this show. And certainly I think it goes, and certainly with the quotes from Mr. Tucker about sort of what he wants to do visually with the show, you would hope that Mr. Thorne is game to kind of take the show in that direction as well. So yeah, I think that's kind of exciting, and it will be interesting to see, yeah, if there's like a notable difference, whether it's in the dialogue or in the types of story told. I know James Tucker said that he feels that there might be a bit more action in this season compared to season one, but that they still
Mm-hmm.
really want to they still really want to center the sort of detective elements and that sort of thing. And I think they noted that is one of the similarities they have with the Matt Reeves Batman. Maybe one of the only direct ones is that they still want their Batman to be a bit more of a cerebral character and a bit more of a thinker and a detective than a two-fisted character. So I guess we will see as we continue on here. But yeah, interested to see what Mr. Thorne does as the new head writer. Kind of arm in arm with Mr. Tucker as the new sort of lead producer, sort of shepherding the whole thing.
Yeah, we will see what the end result is with that. And as you alluded there, in the direct interview, which I say interview, but it was more or less 3 or 4 quotes from Mr. Tucker. So I don't know if it qualifies as I don't know what the industry definition is of interview versus quotes, but they directly asked James Tucker, as I mentioned before, about any concerns over the ongoing production of the Batman Part 2, and obviously Matt Reeves is directing that, and Matt Reeves is also the executive producer here. So they questioned directly as to whether or not there was any concern of stepping on toes. And as you mentioned, he said that Matt Reeves is very understanding of what the vision is that the showrunners for Caped Crusader have, as far as what they're drawing from. They're both pulling from the same source material. Obviously, there's only so much source material for that version of Batman character that you can go to. So they are kind of pulling from that, but they've largely, as he put it, avoided stepping on Matt Reeves' toes. And there wasn't really a directive of what they could or couldn't do. But he would say that the similarities, you said, the only similarities that they have is they're both leaning into that sort of detective style and that detective side of the Batman character versus the more, traditionally bombastic, high tech gadgetry of the more, modern comics. He's still working with traditionally things that are, I believe Mr. Thorne put it in the interview, this isn't from a specific era. Can you say that it's 1940s somewhere in some city in America, post World War II or just pre World War II? Probably, but it's intentionally left vague. However, the technology is of that era, so you can kind of pinpoint it. So that's kind of where the similarities end between the Batman Part 2 and Caped Crusader there. So on to talking about the visuals, as you already alluded to, Liam, and mentioned here. I think the most exciting tidbit for us, at least for me, was the discussion of upping the quality. That's a direct quote of the animation for season 2,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a focus that Mr. Tucker really had with going into season 2. I think he was quoted as saying they learned what worked and wasn't quite there. So he didn't come out and directly trash the animation studios or the end product, I think. But to your point, he mentioned putting more emphasis on those shadows and vignettes and doing things a little bit differently, like you said, adding in the shadows after post-production, which is interesting. So hopefully, one of the biggest critiques that we had through all 10 reviews of this show that we did for Caped Crusader, a lot of the critique was the animation looking flat,
Mm-hmm.
stiff, and really kind of dragging the episodes down at time, just because it's people standing still in kind of awkward lighting and looking very stiff, not moving, not blinking, and with little tiny little bits of action kind of injected here or there once an episode, while it's a lot of talking and sitting and dudes in suits. And at times very muddy and black and dark gray and just not appeasing. It's not eye-catching in any sort of way. So the idea that there was some focus that was put into this, I know that the article mentions that Studio Greta was returning as one of the animation studios. However, they did also introduce Doghead Animation, which is this animation studio in Italy, which you don't hear. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm not an animation expert by any means, but usually we hear, you know, things tending to come from Asia for animation studios in at least traditionally, whether it's Japan or Korea.
Hmm.
Typically, those are the main ones that you hear pulled from. So this one being from Europe and being from Italy is interesting. I think it makes a little more sense when you understand what this animation studio does or did or does, having worked with Amazon's other projects with Batman, with the Merry Little Batman sketch short, I guess, and then also the kind of spin-off from that, the Bat Fam series, neither of which we've watched or I've watched personally since they've debuted. Maybe that's something in the future we can look at for doing a nice holiday bonus review or something like that. But so yeah, introducing a new animation studio that has worked with Prime before with another Batman project, at least is something encouraging. So that I think was maybe the most exciting thing to come out of that article, which is it seems that the showrunners understand that maybe the final product wasn't everything that it could have been, and at times um, was a detriment. So they're hoping or looking to kind of change things and then inject a little bit of something different for season two here.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely excited to hear that. It's yeah, the season one animation is just it's a little rough. I mean, we as you said, we talked about it at length. You can go listen to our full reveals or for full reviews. Easy for me to say to talk about that. But yeah, so it's interesting again, like we said, to hear James Tucker kind of be in lockstep, to think like, no, we can do better with this. And the fact that they did move on from one of the animation studios they used, I think is interesting too. So yeah, I think that's exciting. You just hope to see a little bit more fluidity. And also I was thinking about this, and I think you really nailed it, where we were talking about it a few weeks ago, where one of the things a lot of times in Eastern animation, there there will be very still images, very little actual animation on the screen. But those character designs are so interesting, and there's so much happening on the screen that you barely notice that like the character's barely moving, or that
Hmm.
his mouth is obscured, so you don't have to animate it to the dialogue or whatever.
Sure.
Whereas when you have this very stripped down Bruce Timm style, and the animation is kind of rigid and stiff, it's kind of a double whammy, because then you're just looking at a guy in a beige suit. Like what am I looking at here? There isn't really anything that draws your eye, to
Hmm.
distract from the facts. So, not even really even some of the ways they would do it in the original animated series, where they would where they would paint the character into the background and things like that, the old Fleischer Superman style
Hmm.
gags. There really wasn't much of that. So excited to hear that Mr. Tucker felt the same way and is looking to up the quality there. And then yeah, the introduction of perhaps more title cards, though maybe not in the same sense of the old Eric Radomski title cards from BTOS, but more, as he said, in the style of the old like 1940s movie title cards. I think that's a fun idea too, and can definitely anything that can help you, as you said, get more into that early 1940s aesthetic. I think it's going to be a good thing for this show. So definitely excited to see that was kind of a mission statement for for the people on the production side, and fingers crossed.
Yeah, we will. I guess we'll see. I'm not expecting this to be a complete overhaul here. I don't think that this is going to be going from what
Sure.
we saw and what we've talked about, much of what modern animation ends up being, which is there's not as much money poured into it, or maybe the people that are hired don't are using tools that don't allow for that type of animation that we saw back in the early 90s. So yeah, I'm hoping some of the things that it's funny when you were mentioning some of the things that you see with Eastern animation being not having a ton of movement or character movement, but the character design's also helping that. Some of the other tricks that they do too, where you have the backgrounds moving instead of the characters, or some of the things that make things look just not static and stiff. I'm sure there are tricks that can be done that help with that, and it just seems like a lot of what season one was doing led to that feeling like a little bit of a letdown for the series, which then makes it feel a little dry and drab in certain episodes. So yeah, looking forward to that. Last note that we'll mention here, which is interesting, Mr. Tucker wanted to make sure that he got in that interview that German expressionism is in the DNA, which sounds, I had to Google what German expressionism is, and I'm not sure that I still understand it completely. But what was interesting is the article mentioned that he was excited about including that specifically to influence the noir style, and that kind of bridging the DNA between those original silent films and what would become motion pictures later on, and talked about how potentially pushing the way that the show looks for a hypothetical season three. So there was no confirmation of a season three in there. Obviously, we've talked about it before. A lot of times shows don't last past two seasons these days in the streaming era or the content era of shows.
Mm-hmm.
So it will be interesting to see if this show. I had forgotten season one was certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. So critics apparently loved season one. I think the audience score was a little bit lower than that. So we'll see what happens with season two. If enough people watch it and if enough critics enjoy it, maybe it'll get greenlit for a third season and we see a continued evolution of what this show looks like. But back to season two, Liam, we're going to preview a little bit here about what we expect to see in season two. So one of the things mentioned, it seems like I think this was kind of the way that it was set up in season one, but one of the things that Jeffrey Thorne mentioned was that each episode is kind of its standalone thing. However, it's set up like a novel where there are bits of the story that progress within those individual chapters. Maybe not so much in season one. You had some breadcrumbs of establishing characters and creating relationships or non-relationships between them that ultimately, I think the big one is the Harvey Dent story and maybe the Batman and Barbara Gordon and Jim Gordon relationships that kind of flourish throughout. But it seems like that we're probably going to have a larger overarching plot here for this season that's going to play out in the background kind of for the stories that we see in each of the 10 episodes, which feels about right for a modern storytelling for the show. But let's jump in here for a moment and talk about who we've seen. So as I mentioned, a 2-minute trailer dropped not that long ago. We also got some individual stills that were dropped courtesy of IGN for some shots that were not in the trailer. So villains that that are confirmed for season two here, Liam. So we know the Riddler, who seems to be the main focal point of the trailer, is in this. We have Poison Ivy. We have a brace yourselves for the outrage on the internet, female Mad Hatter. We have Roxy Rocket, the Scarecrow, Harley Quinn, and Joker. Those are all confirmed. There are some others that we'll talk about here as far as the rumors are concerned. But let's start with the Riddler. As I mentioned, he is the main focal point pretty much for this trailer, which leads one to believe that he might be the main baddie for the entire season, or they could be doing that thing where they just take one episode and make that the focal point of the trailer. I'm not sure. You got any read on that?
Yeah, it certainly seemed it. In fact, it appears that the Riddler and Poison Ivy are kind of something of a Bonnie and Clyde type relationship. There's a shot of them kissing in front of an explosion at one point. So it does seem like they'll feature pretty prominently. I wonder, given Poison Ivy being a character that is, known to use mind control, I don't know if we want to get into basis speculation off
We
the
can.
top,
We're gonna speculate all
okay.
throughout this. Let's do it.
So yeah, my thought is like they're going to frame it as Riddler is like the leader of whatever this gang is, when really it'll be she's pulling the shots and controlling him with her feminine wiles and her magic plant lipstick and whatever else. So that was kind of my read, is like it's gonna they're gonna kind of play it like it's a Bonnie and Clyde, and maybe almost like that's their version of a Joker and Harley sort of evil partnership. But really, I could see it being that she's actually sort of the one that has the real power, either through mind control or whatever. So I think that's them being paired together is very interesting. I can't really think of a lot of Poison Ivy and Riddler stories that come to mind. But yeah, I think so. I think that's kind of an interesting thing. It will be interesting, like we said, if any of these villains, other than perhaps the Joker, who seemingly is kind of this background boogeyman feature that will trickle out over the season. We'll get to him in a few minutes, but yeah, it certainly seems like these two, Poison Ivy and Riddler, definitely get the focal point of being, the ones creating the most havoc. And then we get these voiceovers from Batman and Alfred talking about, people being gunned down in the middle of the day, and that things are getting more chaotic than ever. And so perhaps that's related to other characters as well, but certainly that seems like there's a lot of footage, it feels like, of the Riddler and his gang opening fire on people with Tommy guns and things like that. So I guess that'll be the other interesting thing. And you kind of pointed this out to me, which I hadn't thought about, but famously, the Riddler not featured heavily in Batman the Animated Series. He gets his 3 episodes, but Bruce Timm kind of famously said he just never felt like he could really crack the character, and felt like he didn't know how to make it, different than, say, the Adam West show, where it's just people standing around in a room trying to puzzle out a riddle for 10 minutes, and how to make that work. So they just didn't use the character a ton. In fact, he doesn't feature at all really in the new Batman adventures, other than a couple cameos. So interesting that in at the same time that Bruce apparently takes a step back from being heavily involved with the production, that we maybe get a very Riddler focus, at least episode or two, if he's not one of the bigger bads of the whole season.
Yeah. Yeah, the irony is not lost in that. We see that happen there. So who knows? Again, we'll talk about it maybe in Baseless. I'll just speculate along the way with you here. My thought is that the entire trailer is focused on one episode for the most part. I think that the Riddler will be in an episode. I don't think he'll be the overarching villain for the entire season or in multiple episodes. I would tend to believe with the other characters that we see here, he's probably going to be featured as a villain for a episode or maybe 2 episodes, but I can't see it being a entire season. Maybe I'm wrong. Could be wrong. Happy to be wrong. But I think it's just a case where they didn't want to show their hand, so they just used a lot of the more exciting, memorable lines here, because he is portrayed as a much more of a maniacal villain more than a cerebral one in the trailer. I saw someone online sort of compare his characterization more to the Black Mask than a traditional Riddler, where he's just kind of out of his mind a little bit, and being a little bit crazy, demanding the Batman, wanting the Batman to die and taking over Gotham and being the big head honcho. So I agree with your speculation though, that the reveal is going to be that Ivy's controlling him. So yeah, I'm sure we'll get a taste of that as we see here. Also featured in the trailer, an interesting looking version of what appears to be Roxy Rocket, or dare I say Roxy Rocketeer, Liam?
Yes, heavy influence to that Rocketeer character. It looks like, though, in a little video clip that was released maybe literally an hour before we recorded here, we do see that she does, in addition to her little jetpack and steampunk helmet, she does actually get into a big giant, it's more like an actual plane or something that she sits in. She's not riding on the top of it like she is in the
like a bomber. Yeah, like an old style bomber.
Which also leads into a fun bit where we see the debut of the Bat plane for this show, apparently. So I excited also because that appears to be the same design that was used in the sort of the spiritual ancestor to this show, which is the Batman Strange Days short that was done, produced by Bruce Timm, I think for the 75th anniversary of Batman,
Mm-hmm.
entirely in black and white, that also used very similarly retro throwback designs. So interesting to see that version of the Batplane debut here. Even that we're even getting a Batplane because of how stripped down season one was as far as technology is, was kind of exciting to me. So interesting to see what that. Yeah, we didn't really get a sense. It feels like she could be a just like a not maybe not dissimilar from her TNBA role where she's just a mercenary that some other crook, maybe Thorne or somebody hires to get involved in something, and Batman has to chase down. So we'll see about her. And then,
I
yeah, I
will
mean,
say my baseless speculation for her involvement. There's a screen grab of Batman in the Batcave looking at some newspapers. I think it was in the IGN release, and the papers all referenced the Triad as a group. It seems like there's multiple mentions of the Triad. Obviously, the Triads, I think, traditionally in the Nolan verse were like the Chinese mobsters in his fictional universe. I don't know whether or not this is the same Triad or if this could be, in my brain, this is like a terrific trio type group of guys there. Speaking of things that Bruce Timm wants to forget about, his least favorite Batman the Animated Series episode with a terrific trio. Maybe righting a wrong here with that and involving her with a hired mercenary to take out one of the members, or to assist in from working within. Maybe one of those guys hires her to try and upset the chessboard, so to speak, on their behalf, to collect some money in some form or fashion. So, or to eliminate certain people in order to be the only one left of this three-headed CEO group or something. So, that's my basis speculation based on a literal screen grab and the idea that she could be a mercenary.
I like that. And then I guess that would lead us into, yes, as you mentioned, cue the clickbait. It's a female version of a traditionally male character, that being the Mad Hatter. Though from what brief glimpses we get of her in this trailer, it does seem that she seems to be doing either like a children's show or like a daytime talk show of some
Mhm.
sort. So I
Mhm.
think in that way that it totally makes sense that she would be a woman, because traditionally that was, that would be that would be a role that a woman would be to have this. So, how does making someone wear hats that control their minds, will we get like traditional Mad Hattery stuff? And in addition to that, or will it more be a very new take on and just kind of use the name? We'll see. But yeah, my guess for her, my vibe for her was maybe she's some kind of children's host or something. We hear like her at one point say something like, do you feel safe that you're, with your children with this Batman character out there? So maybe someone that's manipulating public opinion, maybe working for Thorne or something to maybe turn public opinion of Batman a little bit as the season goes on. We'll have to see. But yeah, I don't have a strong reaction to this because, with all due respect, the Mad Hatter is not a character I've ever given more than like 5 minutes of thought to.
Mhm.
So, and there doesn't seem to be anything particularly masculine about the character, other than, I guess, and I feel like the character in an Alice in Wonderland set doesn't really feel particularly gendered. So if you look
Sure.
at like the original fairy tale origins of it, as opposed to, yes, traditionally the character's been a man, and I don't know. Like I'll be interested to say if there's a specific reason. Like I said, maybe it's because they feel like, well, if there was a children's host or a daytime talk show public access host in this time period, it would be a woman, or
Mhm.
what's if they decide to make a justification for it within the universe or not. But yeah, hard to get a sense of if we're going like the mind control crazy Mad Hatter route, or if it's going to be more of like she's going to be like a propaganda character who pops up here and there to twist public opinion.
Yeah, I am mad, and I am gonna write about this on the internet. No, I am not mad. I don't care. Let's make this character a woman. I don't care. Yeah, if we're gonna recharacterize this character anyway, which it does. Yeah, my impression is this is like a daytime talk show or like a talking head, whatever that would look like in the 40s, doing public opinion piece and perhaps giving some propaganda from whatever local politicians, or as you mentioned, a mouthpiece for the mob here to directly kind of influence against Batman. Even that, like, you don't even have to give her magical hats that control people's minds. In a way, that is influencing people to potentially change the way that they think. If you think about the way that any of those news media truly works in real life, it is to reinforce or attempt to anger the other side when it's presented. So yeah, it is mass manipulation in reality. So what better way to kind of present that than as somebody leading this, and who, as you mentioned, the character of the Mad Hatter isn't. I know that in Batman the Animated Series, he was this sort of incel that had this, obsession with a girl named Alice, but that's not traditionally what that character is either. So that character has been reinvented several different ways and several different times. So yeah, I think if it doesn't matter to me if you make the Mad Hatter a woman or a man or an elephant. I don't care. You can make them whatever you want to. It's their universe and they're doing something or reinventing characters. I certainly wouldn't be mad about it enough to write about it on the internet, which I have seen people do. But we shouldn't be
Elephant would be
surprised.
freaking sick, actually. What if just one character was just a talking elephant? And they never addressed why. I think that'd be amazing. What a bold choice.
It would certainly be memorable for the right and wrong reasons, for sure. Bound to be memorable, Liam. We'll move on to another character that's been previewed here. Looks like we're going to be getting our version of the Scarecrow for this universe as we see him. We get a brief glimpse of this character kind of just looking like another standard mobster dude. I thought, honestly, for the first 3 or 4 times that I watched the preview, I thought he was wearing like a weird ironworker's mask, or it kind of looks like the masks that Kirby gave the parademons back in the day, or kind of look like the parademon looked modern day. Also, it is not, though. He has one of those plague doctor masks with the gigantic hook, like bird nose attached to it. And it's a little bit more easy to be identified on the cover of the animation magazine with that beautiful artwork that they included there. So yeah, Scarecrow with a cool plague doctor mask. I'm in.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And it's funny because you mentioned in some of our miscellaneous villain section, there's one shot of a guy with like these big goggles and like a almost looks like a collar around his neck.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might also be Scarecrow, and that's what he looks like under the mask. There's some baseless speculation for you. That could also be perhaps one of the other characters that we've seen rumored, whether it's we can get some of those Dr. Death or Hugo Strange perhaps. But I thought, oh, I don't know, the head shape, and maybe it's just because the mask has the big round orange goggle eyes, and I thought maybe that's also, maybe that's like the mask gets torn off, or it seems like there's a fire going on. Maybe it's like the mask kind of melts off of his face, and we see what he looks under it. But that's my my completely baseless guess on the identity of that character. But we will see. But yeah, I mean, I always love, similarly to what we talked about last week, how no matter how many Batman adaptations there are, you always want to see a new Joker. I kind of feel the same way about Scarecrow, just because I think, like the Joker, Scarecrow is such a great foil for Batman because it's an element of Batman reflected back at him, the use of the psychological tactics and fear and the imagery, and some of the imagery and the striking fear into the hearts is so elementary to what Batman is. So to have that reflected back at him in the form of a villain like Scarecrow is always a lot of fun. So excited to see what this show does with a character like that.
Yeah, absolutely. My speculation is that guy with the collar might be Clock King, because he's got like a little gear
Ooh,
thing on his lapel when you look in. I don't know though. It's very hard
okay.
to identify him as a specific character there. So we'll wait and see with that one. But some of the other reveals that we see here, we do see a gentleman jump off the roof. But and the shot directly before that seems to be a human bat hybrid character. A lot of people immediately were like, "It's Man Bat." I think you and I discussed about this when the trailer dropped. I think it's a red herring. I think that the fear gas might get released. There's an opening shot where there's like a big bonfire that happens, and I think that that's how our fear toxin gets released. And then there's madness that occurs after that. We see zombies running around. We see this human bat creature
Hmm.
with the shot after it that comes with a man jumping off the roof. I think it's all fear toxin that's affecting people what they see. But I could be wrong. People are saying that that's Man Bat. Maybe it is. He's certainly a human bat hybrid. There's also speculation over Dr. Death slash Dr. Destiny making a preview or making an appearance here. Also, Solomon Grundy. So, as I mentioned, there's a zombie shot. Everybody's like, oh, it's Solomon Grundy.
Hmm.
Again, maybe it is. Maybe it's just a zombie mirage. Maybe it's a real zombie. We don't know. There's a lot of them running around in that one sequence, though. In
Well,
the
yeah,
in
I
the
saw a
preview.
lot of people talking about that zombie, also noting that it has a little streak of white hair, which people thought is maybe a Jason Todd joke, but
Yes.
not clear. But
Well,
we know there is a red-haired kid named Jason running around, but and he's very much a child, not an adult here. So
it's true.
I don't know if that would be true, but I did see people noting that. So
Well, very
maybe
famously,
that is just like a little sight gag.
his return, yeah, his I'm sure it's probably a sight. I mean, it's not an accident if it is a sight gag, and his return from the grave in the comics, very famously, was at the result of kind of being a zombie. He came back and didn't have a brain for a little period of time,
Mhm.
apparently. So that would be a fun little joke there. A couple of other things that are notable there. There's a shot of this guy in a red robe that has the bat symbol on it, and he's surrounded by a bunch of other people in robes. We're not sure who this character is specifically. A lot of baseless speculation online that this is an appearance of the Mad Monk or the Monk,
Mhm.
who was Batman's second villain ever created in Detective Comics number 31, courtesy of Gardner Fox and Bob Kane. That's interesting because he was a vampire, which again we see that man bat type creature. Maybe that's him jumping off a roof and
Hmm.
turning into a Batman. I don't know. But there's certainly
Hmm.
something there
Could
along
be.
with the shot that we see later on with Montoya and Gordon looking in an elevator with what appears to be a blood splotch paint of the bat symbol. My baseless speculation is that we have this cult of the bat type story here where they're kind
Hmm.
of a little bit obsessed with who Batman is and maybe taking that to the nth degree there, maybe killing people, attempting to overthrow, maybe a little bit of anarchy thrown in there. The anarchy characterization
Could
also.
be.
He wore a red robe. So overthrowing the government, overthrowing the local officials, and that's what we see as the chaos and some of the insanity that's occurring there that Bruce is narrating through that preview. So that's going to be interesting. I like the idea of them going deep, deep, deep into the archives of like those. I mean, if you're going to draw
Yeah.
off the look of the character and the characterization of that like quiet, mysterious detective from that early Bill Finger, Bob Kane, Jerry Robinson era, why not go into the lesser known villains and pull some of those guys out like the Mad Monk?
Absolutely. I think that's really fun. Anything that involves like cults or anything, the name Deacon Blackfire also comes to mind. The
Mm.
main villain of the Batman the Cult
Hmm.
series, which I remember reading as a kid and it scaring the bejesus out of me. Uh, the idea of Batman gets captured by this cult in the sewer and basically begins to succumb to Stockholm syndrome as Robin has to work to free him. So that could be, another you could kind of mix and match some elements of various sort of these sort of religious leader, cult leader characters that exist in the Batman lore. Perhaps I
Mm-hmm.
do think Mad Monk is a good shout and seems to fit the mode and the time period pretty darn well. So yeah, and maybe it does mix it in. And also to the point, we did have a gentleman ghost. So if ghosts exist, why can't vampires? So why, it could very well be that man bat is not a fear gas, like you said, and it is a some sort of actual literal vampire character as well. So many ways they could go with that, and that would certainly be a bit of a different take on maybe pulling on the Batman Red Rain story a little bit, the famous
Mm-hmm.
Elseworld of where of introducing actual vampires into the world of Batman could be very interesting, or the famous Batman versus Dracula animated film, which maybe we'll review this Halloween or maybe not. Who knows? Is
Our
this the
deepest,
year? We'll find out.
our deepest apologies to the Batman versus Dracula. We've run out of time, to borrow a phrase. But yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned, yes, there is a little boy named Jason running around. There was also a little girl named Carrie that was running around very famously in that Nocturna episode. It appears from one of the still shots that we get that she may be returning, and this time she herself, I don't this speculation that she's going to be the sidekick of Batman and the sidekick's going to be the Gray Ghost is laughable to me. It's just people reading things way too literally. I think maybe she shows up as a cameo and she's trying to say that she's going to become a superhero. It's very cute though. She's wearing the Gray Ghost costume, obviously from Batman the Animated Series. There's another shot in the trailer of a gentleman boarding up a toy store, and we see what appears to be Gray Ghost or maybe Green Ghost. He's colored green in the shot. Merchandise very clearly homaging the Gray Ghost there. So yeah, fun to see her return. Will be the speculation. I'm not on board with Batman having a 8-year-old sidekick in this universe just yet. Just doesn't work with me.
Yeah, I could see this being maybe these kids pop up again. Who knows how many more seasons, if any, we'll get after this. But I could see Carrie and maybe some of the other Robins popping up as sort of these like recurring, almost like a Newsboy Legion type character to
Right.
go into the deep cut where they
Right.
pop up once in a while, and maybe Batman occasionally uses them for like information or something
Sure.
on the streets, because they're these kids that are running around on the streets of Gotham every night. So but yeah, the idea that she's literally going to suit up as the Gray Ghost and be his sidekick, I think I'd be surprised. I wouldn't hate it, because as I've stated, I think one of my wish list items for season 2 was that I would like to see a full-fledged Robin introduced at some point. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be Carrie Kelly, and I don't think it's going to be in a Gray Ghost Halloween costume. That was honestly my thought. Was like, I bet there's an episode that takes place on Halloween, and she's like out trick or treating or something, and Batman runs into her or something like that. Like I feel like that's much more likely than her suddenly than Batman taking on an 8-year-old sidekick out of the blue here. But we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. All that, I think, between that and the animation magazine article mentioning the escalating extreme nature of threats, I think this is kind of fulfilling what we see at the end of season 1, where Harvey is on the docks, and Batman and Montoya and Gordon and both Gordons are there, and they're telling them how they're going to whisk him away and he's going to testify. And he laughs and he says, "You can't stand up to this wave. You can knock one guy down and 100 more monsters are going to come up, rise up in its place." I really think we see that coming to fruition here with the chaos. Obviously, this is it's not completely more colorful. Like, we're not getting, rainbow Batman costumes here, but we definitely are stepping towards a more a wider threat. You get the sense that Gotham really has delved further into chaos. It's not just corruption and mob bosses anymore. It's now people kind of all jostling and seeing an opportunity to take over here. And of course, the biggest one likely being the Joker, who, as we mentioned, was hinted at the end of season 1. We see him prominently revealed here at the end of the trailer. It's a nice little bit here where Batman's taking on some goons. He's cleared the room. He gets a phone call and he picks up the phone, and this mysterious voice is on the other end and says that he's gonna swearing to reveal who he is, who Batman really is, and then kind of punctuates it in with a "Let us begin" at the end of the trailer with the faintest little laugh at the very end as
Mhm.
well. But still, most interestingly about the Joker, Liam, it feels like they're doing this for some big reveal. We haven't seen the full face. We get the eyes complete. We get the same shot of kind of like just the eyes, and everything else is in shadow in the trailer. Even in the artwork that they released this week on that animation magazine cover, his bottom half of his face is covered there, leading to a lot of speculation. What are we going to see here when it comes to not only the look of this character, but what are you feeling as far as the characterization of what we end up getting out of this character?
Yeah, it does seem that he has this sort of this puppet master. He's maybe going to be this shadowy figure, the Professor Moriarty, character who's maybe secretly orchestrating many of the events we see Batman contending with across the series. Obviously, I don't think James Tucker name dropping Jerry Robinson is an accident. Obviously, Jerry
Certainly.
Robinson, co-created the Joker,
Hmm.
and that if you look up that original design that he had for the Joker, which is I think very much based on the 1930s film The Man Who Laughs, and just it's really a like big forehead, big grin, and just like really kind of freakish eyes,
Hmm.
and like the kind of the big slicked back hair. Not, I would say, a little bit vampire like, ironically enough, kind of the
Hmm.
way we, the way that we often depict Dracula, for instance. But just the big toothy grin, but kind of kept, just it's. I think we're really gonna go as old school as we possibly can with this Joker, and seems to have a slight British accent, if I'm not mistaken, in his few lines we hear.
Hmm.
So also again, yeah, maybe this guy's a bit less of a thespian and is a little bit more of an intellectual than we're used to seeing, which will be interesting, obviously, because yes, I think it's so hard to think of who the Joker was before all of these wonderful modern interpretations that we have, whether it's Heath Ledger or Jack Nicholson or Mark Hamill or even some of the great comic work like what Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams did with the character in the 70s. So to think about, can we go back? Can we kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube and get this guy back to his more bare bones portrayal and do something new by going back to the oldest version of him? Is that possible? And I guess that's kind of what we're trying to do with Batman as well. So maybe it fits to do that for the Joker as well. But I do think it's a big swing because even though it is not necessarily not true to a version of the Joker that's existed, it's not really a version of the Joker that's existed either in comics or pop culture in general for maybe 40 or 50 or 60, 70 years. So it's a real, I think it's a big swing to kind of go with this type of version with the Joker. But again, I love the idea of trying something new by going super old school is a fun idea too.
Yeah, I think when apparently the Three Jokers story that Jeff Johns did is not super like the artwork is respected. Jason Fabok famously
Mm-hmm.
did incredible work on that, but I think a lot of people didn't
Oh
like that
yeah,
story, I guess, for a couple of different reasons. But anyway, all that to say, that did to me, I think, really introduce the idea of this other persona that the Joker had for a very long time, which is the mob boss that just happened to kind of look like a clown. Like he's cruel. It's the
mm-hmm.
killer persona that Paul Dini always talked about balancing their Batman with in Batman the Animated Series, their Joker with in that series. I think this leaning heavily into that and him not having the sense of humor, being more of a killer clown versus a clown that's a killer, I think makes it more interesting. I think layers it and certainly steeps it in that character that, as I mentioned, was in that Three Jokers, highlighted heavily in that Three Jokers comic, and then obviously dates back to the original interpretation of that character. Yes, the modern Joker that we all see, even with different interpretations like the Joaquin Phoenix version or the Heath Ledger version or some of the other cartoons that we've seen, they all tend to kind of lean into a little bit of the comedy of that character. Maybe the Heath Ledger is probably the exception, but the idea of this stoic clown to be feared, and that's the persona, is obviously steeped in who that original version of that character that Jerry Robinson was so influential in creating. And the man who laughs and the Conrad Veidt version of that silent film that spawned this character for the next 80 years, or influenced this character for the next 80 years. So yeah, I like the idea of this character going back to the roots. Again, if we're going back to what the aesthetic was for that original, we're doing a Detective Comics number 27, the animated series essentially here, then yeah, why not go back to the roots of that character? And some people aren't going to like it because they're expecting to see a jovial, fun, wisecracking Joker. And if that's not the one that you see on screen, then maybe you'll be a little disappointed. But I think that that's what Mr. Tucker is saying here. That, he said that if you go further back than the versions of Mark Hamill and Jack Nicholson, which obviously are the late 80s there, you start going further back than that, you'll kind of catch on to what they're doing when you see the reveal, which leads me to believe it's going to be a more intimidating, menacing version of the character that doesn't focus on, wacky, joy buzzers and things like that. The clown aesthetic, the goofy, lighter side of the character that we saw later on. It's going to be set in more serious tone. He just happens to have maybe a mangled face, maybe he's got scars, maybe he's just got a creepy smile. Who knows? We'll figure out why they haven't shown the face. But yeah, I like the idea. Let's do something different. We talked about it when we were reviewing last week's episode. Joker fatigue is real, but everybody wants to see the Joker. So rather than just playing the hits here, well, why not go back to the original version of this character and make it a little bit more serious and make it a little bit more menacing versus, this comedy character that has a darker side to him.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm definitely very excited. If we had to pick one villain that we're most excited to see, I hate to be such a basic bee, but it's the Joker for sure. Like I'm really interested in that, especially after reading Mr. Tucker's thoughts on taking the character further back to some of his earliest roots. I think is a really exciting thing to do with it. So yeah, I'm as much as I would love to see, like we said, some of those deeper cut villains like the Mad Monk or Dr. Death. That could be a lot of fun too, but nah, man, it's the Joker for me.
There you go. Well, yeah, I'm excited. I think that's what everybody's looking forward to. They got to. I think the pressure is on to stick the landing with that one. So I almost fear that the royal the royal we, that we set this up for failure is like, it's not going to be. They can't stick the landing. It won't live up to our expectations. So maybe some of the other episodes will be more memorable at the end of the day, but who knows? Maybe they'll hit a home run here. We'll see. We'll leave that to the speculation of us in the future, and we'll leave that to us in the future, whether or not we enjoy it or not. But wrapping things up here, Liam, with our speculation station here, we covered a lot of our speculation for what we might see in season 2 here. What's one thing that you want to see based on the things that we've seen in the trailer and the screen grabs and the stuff that we've talked about here that you might want to see in this season 2?
I think based on the character's origins, a big question that I'm excited to see answered: does this show's Joker interact with this show's Harley Quinn? I think that
Mm.
because they are not seemingly joined at the hip, or he did not create her or help her create herself in the way that he did in many other versions, we don't necessarily have to link those characters. But I think that could in many ways make it even more interesting if you remove the sort of, like you said, the screwball comedy, the Bonnie and Clyde, or even the abusive relationship part of that. What would a Joker and Harley, who are virtual strangers to each other, act like? And so I think that's maybe my biggest question I'm waiting to see answered. We know Harley's in this season. Obviously, she was in season one as well, very memorably. But I think it'll be interesting to see if this Harley and this Joker get any FaceTime together.
There you go. That's something that's pretty good to speculate about, or something that we want to see here. Yeah, I think I just want to see Batman doing more detective stuff. Like, I just want to see more Batman.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about in season one how Batman really played a back seat role in the majority of the episodes. I hope that we get more focus on Batman in season two. I think that would answer a lot of the critics that we saw from season one complaining there wasn't a lot of Batman. And what's interesting is we've talked about doing reviews of all of the Batman the Animated Series episodes that we've reviewed to date. There are stories that work really well without Batman being involved. And there are stories that work really well with a lot of Batman being involved. You don't have to have Batman be the central focus to have a good episode,
Mhm.
but when all of or the majority of your episodes in a 10 season run do not focus much on Batman, and the moments that we get with him are kind of cold and gray and not very clear on who this character is, it turns a show called Batman Caped Crusader into a show about that should be called like Gotham City or the Rogues Gallery or the people of Gotham or something like that, because it very much makes the focus the people around him. So I'm hoping that we get more focus on Batman. Obviously, as we talked about, we see the growth at least somewhat at the end of season one. He calls Alfred by his first name. Is kind of like this big benchmark. Interestingly, though, in the trailer, he refers to Alfred as Pennyworth again. So
Mhm.
don't know what happens there, if there's some regret or some backsliding or something that changes his opinion on Alfred and starts calling him by his last name again. But or maybe it's just something he continues to struggle with
Mhm.
when it comes to that. I don't
I
know.
thought I thought maybe, I mean, it's not a great code name if it's his actual last name, but maybe it's like when he's in the field talking to him over the radio, he
Possibly.
calls him Pennyworth, but when he's, in person, he calls him Alfred. We'll have to see, but I
Good
did notice
speculation.
that as well.
Good speculation there. I like the idea of the bat plane being introduced also. That's pretty exciting. My other brief hope, I would really like to see the Strange Days version of Hugo Strange brought into this universe so that
Hmm.
we can link that Strange Days short with this universe and just make it canon at that point. That way we have a little bit of fun with that. There is a shot of a bald guy from behind in one of the Riddler scenes that sort of matches the motif of Hugo Strange, and feels like that character could fit in here. Maybe he's the person that's developing the potion that creates Poison Ivy's lipstick or what have you, or something
Hmm.
that's influencing the Mad Hatter's ability to control people's minds. I don't know, but sure, bring Hugo Strange in, please. But yeah, I think that's pretty much covers everything that we know to this point. Everything that we've speculated along the way here has certainly been very fun. I, for one, am pretty excited. I think I got hyped doing the research for this, reading some of the article, or reading the article about this got me excited. The idea that we're looking for a step forward in a lot of different areas, not just in the storytelling, but in the production, and some of the, finding their footing and learning from their mistakes in season one, and what Mr. Tucker has for us in store, along with Mr. Thorne and the rest of the writing team here in season two, along with our new animation studio also. I'm think I'm at an all-time high here. I'm ready for season 2 to drop. What about you?
Yeah, super excited for that. Just yeah, like I said, I think in delving back into the world for our reviews, and then as you said, kind of prepping to bring everybody this preview episode. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty jazzed. I feel pretty optimistic about. There's still plenty of stuff we liked in season one, even with all the criticisms we did have. So, just yeah, you hope they build on a solid foundation and take us to new heights from here.
Absolutely, Liam. And we'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts on Batman Caped Crusader Season 2. You can do that several different ways. You can, of course, join the conversation on social media at DCAU Review, mostly on Twitter/X. We are also on Instagram. You can certainly comment on our posts there, slide into our DMs. Tweet at us. You can also comment on this very episode if you're listening on Spotify. We read those comments. We try and respond to them as well. So maybe you don't have one of the major social medias, but you're listening on Spotify. That's a good way to interact with us. You can also leave a review if you want to on Apple Podcast. If you're listening there, leave a 5-star review. Tell people what you like about the show and leave a little note about what your excitement level is for Caped Crusader Season 2. When should we start reviewing Season 2 episodes? Obviously they're all dropping at one time. I don't know how we have a plan for the month of August, but if you want to hear or see some reviews coming out shortly thereafter for season 2, let us know. Drop us a line, get in the comments, and give us a shout out there. You can also, of course, leave a comment on our YouTube page if you're listening there, or even if you're not listening there, you can head over to there, check out this episode's video, and drop us a line there. Head over to DCAUreview.com for all the links to all of our socials there. That's the easiest place to go. You can also check out the show notes of the podcast if you want to, or the bio link, bio.fm link in our Instagram and Twitter. Liam, another way for you to send feedback to us would be through our buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review site. You can check that out, obviously, at buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review or through DCAUreview.com. You can check that out. Send us a one-time support with your thoughts, your excitement level here. Heck, we might even read it before we review our first episode there. So send that over there. Or if you want to, you can become a monthly supporter while you're over there and join us at one of the 3 levels of monthly support, including our top tier level. And that one allows you to submit questions. This week, we asked our supporters to send us a question in regarding their thoughts and excitement, anything they had questions about for Batman Caped Crusader Season 2. And we were kind enough to get Zach's contribution to this week's. And we're going to read Zach. I know Zach's got some thoughts on Season 2, and he has a question as well.
That's right. Zach mentioned that he also hopes that they keep the Joker like he was in that original 1940 comic book appearance. And it seems that they are headed that way. And he actually thinks that Harley and the Joker should be kept separate. So he's not on board with my perhaps hope to see them interact in some way. It also mentions that he thinks that it could be very interesting to have this female version of the Mad Hatter, especially if the mind control element is there. But then he gets down to his serious question for us, which I think is a fair one based on everything we've talked about, certainly what we've talked about in our season 1 reviews. And he says, in all seriousness, do you like this version of Batman? I mean, after the rewatch he did, he found this version of Batman and Bruce to be very unlikable. Not that he's necessarily rooting against him, but just think that he's a very difficult version to like. And what are our thoughts on that? Yeah, I agree. I think we've talked about that quite a bit the last few weeks, and it is interesting. Has he crossed a line in some of these episodes where he's so unlikable that you can't even root for him? I think is an interesting question. And it's not quite there. And I think maybe the guy we see in the first 4 or 5 episodes is on the borderline of that. But I think maybe as that, starting with the Gentleman Ghost episode and then, the Nocturna episode, and you start to see more of his humanity leaking in, and then certainly by the finale of season 1. So I think they did stick the landing, but it is hard, as we talked about, because he's so stoic and quiet we often don't know what he's thinking. We talked about that at length last week. So yeah, I think it is a real risk. So I would say, I don't know how I feel about this version of Batman yet, and I hope season two, at least makes me feel one way or the other in a more, passionate way, because I don't want to feel meh about Batman and a Batman show. So I am hoping that we really spend a lot of time delving more into Bruce's psyche this season. What about you?
Yeah, I think another reason why I hope that there is more Batman. I don't want to dislike the Batman that's the main character of your show. And I know we talked about, I think leading up to season one, the producers and directors in one of the interviews mentioned how Batman is not really the hero that you want to cheer for in season one.
Mm.
And I think to Zach's point, he's very unlikable. He's a very unlikable guy. He's fake. We see him thinking that he's kind of the smartest guy in the room a lot of the times, to his friend's detriment at the end, or this person he claims to be his friend, where he's using him to try and get information. He's also so set on Harvey being the one that testifies that he's willing to do anything and everything to make sure that he gets out of there safely, even if it means recklessly putting his own life in danger against 15 mobsters, which that's obviously has a heroic edge to it. But I think the fact that he has such a visceral response to Dent, kind of thinking that or stating that there's not going to be an answer to this wave of monsters and mobsters that are incessant on taking over Gotham. Instead of being resolved, seems to come out much more angry, as if Bruce maybe believes that and is frustrated by that. So yeah, I would like to see this Batman take on a more. I don't need him to be a bright, sunny dude. Totally understand that, and I respect the idea of him being this more aloof and shadowy figure. But he's supposed to be the hero of your show. So I'm hoping there's more in season two that makes him heroic. There are little glimpses that we got, like when he holds the hand, like he lets Carrie like hold on to his cape when they're escorting Nocturne out of the forest, I think of, or some of the conversations that he has with Barbara, where he gives her the way to contact him if he needs it, or the interactions that he has with Jim. And Alfred at the end of season one. But yeah, I'm not saying a complete overhaul needs to happen here, but we don't have a guaranteed season three here. So I would prefer this Batman to be at least somewhat likable going into a potential season three. So yeah, I'm hoping there's some evolution here, maybe some off-screen work that was done and alluded to, and maybe just him being a little bit less prickly in season two.
Agreed.
And if you would like to join Zach and our growing list of supporters, we invite you again to head over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. And please consider supporting the podcast. Join at that super friend top tier level for your opportunity to submit a question yourself. Liam, we are wrapping up here the month of July. We're heading into the final month of the summer, at least at the original time of recording here. And that means we are starting a new month. This month also, Batman Cape Crusader is not the only thing that's happening at Warner Brothers. And again, I'm not just talking about the speculation of mergers and who's going to have a job at the end of September, but we are talking about there's still things that are being released. There's still things that are happening. And one of the more interesting, and again, I think hotly debated topics of the last several months is the upcoming DC Universe Lanterns television program that is supposed to come out here. I think it's a part of the recently once again rebranded HBO Max schedule for the month of August. So we figured a little bit of synergy here with what people will be talking about. There'll be some renewed interest into the Green Lantern character. And we have an episode of Static Shock that is going to help support that synergy.
Absolutely. We have the delightfully fun episode called Fallen Hero to talk about, where Static teams up with not only John Stewart, or does he team up, as it appears maybe John Stewart's finally gone off the deep end and is perhaps turned to a life of crime. Can Static face off against his own hero? How will it work with Green Lantern and Static both being voiced by Phil Lamar? I can't wait to talk about it. I haven't seen this episode in a long time, but remember loving it at the time. So excited to kick off Lantern Month next week with a review of Fallen Hero from Static Shock's final season.
Excited to check that one out. We've got a lot of fun stuff in store for Lanterns Month. Please join us next week for that review. But until then, I'm Cal.
I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU.
Bye-bye.